Hello there, Jenn Lawlor here, and in today's video I'm going to do something extremely vulnerable, and that is share my personal story of childhood trauma. So I'm not somebody who experienced, the more obvious kinds of traumatization. I was not physically or sexually abused as far as I can remember. I experienced more subtle forms of traumatization. So it was a more chronic, prolific, just all-encompassing traumatization throughout my childhood, which was what I now know led to complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which manifested itself throughout my life in all sorts of different addictions, in an eating disorder, all sorts of mayhem. So if you are somebody who is experiencing or has experienced complex post-traumatic stress disorder, then you can probably relate to this story. Now, I grew up in Toronto, Canada, in an upper middle class family, and from the outside, our family looked really nice, really wonderful. Kids had smiles on their face. I have one sister, and my parents were gorgeous people, lots of money, lots of travel, lots of, nice house, all sorts. We had everything, that magazine picture perfect family. But on the inside, there was a lot of dysfunction. So relational dysfunction, lack of attunement, so lack of seeing one another for who they really were. And I experienced this as a child as not being loved for who I was, not being seen for who I was, and it was a chronic form of emotional, and I don't know if you want to call it spiritual, but just a neglect on a deep, soulful level. And so what that felt like for me was, it felt like this dark cloud of loneliness. So whenever I was on my own, it was like this deep depression that would just arise within me. And, it felt really anxious, really fearful. I thought my family was always falling apart. My parents argued a lot. I felt like I had to always be hustling to do something to get the attention that I so desperately craved. So, for example, I was a straight A student. I was a perfectionist. I put smiles on my face. Anything that I could do in order to get attention was what I did. And yet, kind of ironically, I was also super, super shy. So I was like the people pleaser, but then I didn't want to be seen because there was this chronic shame that I had. I felt so worthless inside. I felt like I was never good enough. The only time I could feel good enough was for this brief moment when the teacher handed back the paper and there was a big red A+ on it, or when I handed my report card to my parents and they for a brief moment gave me that wonderful attention. It was like I was an addict to that kind of praise. So as my life went on, this trauma, I was living within a trauma world. And if you haven't learned through my videos what a trauma world is, I'd recommend you go check that out, because it's kind of, for me, it's been really eye-opening to learn more about what it's like to be traumatized, and it lets you see your own experience with a new lens. And that's what it did for me. But as I went through my life and I entered into puberty, I, was totally anxious. There were hormones, as and I was really anxious about becoming an adult. Was I going to be able to be successful, or was I going to be a failure as, a middle schooler, as a high schooler? Was I only able to be successful as an elementary student? So there was like this impending doom, this anxiety, this fearfulness that just, kind of overtook me. And so that led me, and my poor self-image, it led me into, at first an innocent junk food free week with a best friend of mine at the time. Then that spiraled into anorexia. And when I say spiraled, I mean spiraled big time. It was the next several years, so this started when I was 13, the next several years I was in and out of the hospital for months at a time, being, on basically life support, tubes for feeding, you name it. It was bad. It was bad news. But anorexia for me was like an escape. It was an escape from, it was like numbing. It was something to fixate my mind on and take my mind away from the pain of the suffering that I felt inside. So fast forward, I started to slowly recover from anorexia, and anorexia kind of morphed into other kinds of addictions like partying, alcohol, drugs, exercise addiction, you name it, workaholicism, whatever you want to call it. Basically, the root underlying loneliness and trauma had not been touched, even though I went to, tons of different therapists, and, nobody ever talked to me about, traumatization of what I was experiencing was trauma. They were always just looking at the symptoms, and nobody, clued me in that I was a traumatized individual. And so things got better, and I'm just going to kind of fast forward through my life, just let you know that the trauma just kind of followed me. There was always this, chronic shame, feelings of worthlessness, wanting to always prove myself, hiding myself from most people, putting on, a public face, being somebody else in private. And there was also quite a bit of anger, outbursts, emotional outbursts. I kind of just felt like a big hot mess. Even though I was successful in, the outer appearance, I was successful inside. I felt like a big hot mess. So about 5 to 7 years ago, things started to really shake up for me. I was running a business that I was super successful with, but I was driving myself into burnout. And I knew that, if I didn't stop on the path that I was on, I was going to kill myself. I just knew that things had to change. I had to get to the root of, just this lifetime of this darkness that was haunting me. And around that time, I started to learn about shame, and things sort of just snowballed from there. I started to learn more about, naming my emotions. I started to turn my attention inward and into my body and feel from the inside what was going on in my body. And I started to pay attention to the thoughts that were going on. I started to practice mindfulness and mindful empathy. So really just feeling with myself what was going on and allowing myself for the first time to just be who I was, to not resist my experience. Even when my experience was really painful, even when I was suffering, I would just hold myself in a space of compassion and attuned to what was going on in my body, and not being caught up in my mind and putting myself down and not letting myself feel what I was feeling. And honestly, what I feel like I did for myself, because from that point on, things started to just really heal, and my life became better, and my inner world started to calm down and settle down, and I started to feel a lot more okay with who I am for the first time in my life, and that dark haunting feeling just sort of dissipated over time. What I really feel like I did by tuning into myself, connecting with my feelings, giving myself the empathy and holding myself with compassion, was I gave myself what I did not get when I was a child. So I attuned to myself. It feels like I reparented myself. Like I gave myself what I didn't get, what chronically traumatized myself as a kid. So as a kid, when I didn't learn how to handle, my emotions, that was a skill that I didn't learn as a kid, because I didn't have anybody modeling how to, have a healthy relationship with anger, for example, or how to have a healthy relationship with loneliness, how to be with myself when I felt ashamed, or how to be with myself when I was confused. I didn't have role models in my life that just taught me that stuff implicitly, like it was just transferred to me by being around them. So I had to learn those skills as a grown-up just by tuning into myself, holding myself, by educating myself about what my emotions were. So I think I'm going to end this video because I feel like I've been rambling on a lot. I hope that gives you a better sense of where I've been, who I am. It's kind of like a crash course, my story all put into a few minutes. I don't know how long this video is, but I hope it gives you a better idea of where I'm coming from, who I am, and what has helped me to heal, just a lifetime of being traumatized. I'm going to get so much deeper into the healing part. I'm going to expand on that in other videos. I'm going to continue to educate about how to recognize trauma, how to educate yourself about your emotions, how to learn how to regulate the dysregulation that is so common with traumatization, and how to bring yourself out of a trauma world if that's where you're living right now. And if you are, I so get the pain that is involved with living in a trauma world. And I want to tell you that your life can get so much better. It is hard work. It takes a ton of perseverance and just repetition to relearn new ways of being with yourself, but it's absolutely possible. And I can tell you that today, people used to tell me no one really truly recovers from an eating disorder. Nobody can recover from that. Well, it's not true. I am not going to sit here and tell you that I don't have intense emotions. I don't have times when, I feel ashamed, and chronic shame comes up, because those old patterns do come up, and I have no idea whether I will ever reach a place where the wounds from being traumatized so chronically don't keep arising, but I can tell you that it is so much easier now to deal with them because I know what I'm dealing with. And, I've expanded what I'm going to talk about in another video, this window of tolerance, so much so that I can handle a lot more. So thank you for sharing this with me. And it feels good to have let you know more about myself, and I look forward to sharing a whole lot more with you in the near future. So if you are not a subscriber yet, I would love to have you subscribe to my channel and stay in touch. Always leave a comment. Let me know if any of my videos have touched you in any way, and I'd love to interact with you in the comments. So leave one down below, and I look forward to sharing more with you very soon.